Here's what's coming up on today's show.
This baby boomer generation, a massive group of people, begins to retire as we are now, about 11,000 a day. We're going to want Social Security checks. We're going to want our Medicare benefits, and that's going to be difficult and rough on the system, and there are going to be changes. So we need to do the planning to make sure that we've looked at that.
Welcome to the How Money Works podcast with Craig and Jennifer Moser of Maestro Wealth Advisors, serving you throughout the Triad of North Carolina for more than 30 years.
Well, so let's talk a little bit today, guys, about why retirement is harder now than it was for prior generations. And maybe harder is not a fair word. Maybe complex. Maybe it's more complex now than it used to be. So maybe that's a better way of looking at that. But let's talk about that a little bit, and see what you guys think. Since Craig, you've been doing this for 35 years, so you've certainly seen
seen some different stuff.
Right? Many changes.
So when I started, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but
before
interest
World War
rates
II,
were a
right?
lot higher. I will give you...
Do not say that.
What did he say?
Before World War II.
He's going to beat me up, y'all.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that right now.
Yeah, anyway, go ahead.
So I'll use my father, Jennifer's father, as my example. People got Social Security. People got a pension.
Mm-hmm.
So you had two very reliable sources of income, and then your third income was just the money that you had saved. And so that was sort of incidental to the pensions. People that retired from Reynolds, people that used to retire from the airline back in the day,
right.
School teachers, not so much doctors and those types of people, but a lot of people had a cash flow from work that would last for your whole life. So we called it back in the day the three-legged stool, however you say it, pension, Social Security, and personal savings. And it was pretty easy. Most of the income that somebody would need, number one and number two, pension and Social Security, tended to take care of most of that. And then depending on how you did as far as a saver, or maybe you had real estate, that was the money that paid the rest of it. So it was pretty great.
That personal side didn't have to be all that fantastic either, right? Because you had
it
those
didn't
other
seem
two.
like it.
Right.
I mean, if you had a lot of guaranteed type income, but today we have 401k type accounts, IRAs, 403bs, 457s, all these accounts we contribute to. And we invest money in, everybody that's listening, but there's no floor. There's no promise of cash flow, So with a pension, you had a reliable income for life, maybe not only your life, but maybe for your spouse. And now what happens is you have ask yourself this question. If you have a significant market decline and you're pulling the money out, what could happen? I mean, something could happen. You could outspend your savings. And since we don't have a pension anymore, it's a little more precarious. You were saying more complex before. Think about it this way. My dad had all these little sayings that made more sense as I got older. One of them would be, if it is to be, it's up to me. You got to get out there and put that money in the retirement accounts now. When we do appointments with people, when we meet with people, I ask them, what's your real goal for retirement? What do you really want to have come in every month, every year after taxes to pay the lifestyle that you want? Hardest question we ask, by the way, because you don't really have a way to answer that if you've never thought about it. You're kind of like, well, I've got this much in the paychecks, and maybe the house will be paid off, and blah 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 blah. And you're trying to figure it out. But once you get that number tied down pretty tight, then you can start to do some financial planning and see how it works. So, the volatility of an investment really impacts in retirement what's going to happen. We've seen, since really COVID, the market's taken off like a scalded dog pretty much. It's been incredible. 2022 wasn't so great, but we're much higher than we were back in 2019. Let's just put it that way. And so the bottom line here is, people have gotten used to the accounts going up in value, but what's going to happen when we have a pullback? Don't be naive and think this stuff's going to go forever. Well, we're going to have another 2000, 2003 event. We're going to have another 2007, 2009 event. It's just going to happen. What's happened recently is these pullbacks have been short, maybe 6, 8, 10 months at the most. and then off the market went again. So you really haven't felt what it's like to pull money out of an account and it stays down a while.
Craig, I want to go back to the point of having a pension versus having money that you've accumulated and creating your own pension. I think there's a different mindset too. When people have a pension, and it is a never-ending stream of funds, you really don't know how deep that well is until, if you live a long time, it's a very deep well. If you live a short time, it's not a very deep well. But when you get those dollars, it's just like your paycheck. You get that and you pay taxes on it. The thing with 401ks really didn't start off until the 78 or 80s,
81.
And then Roth didn't start out until 2006. So those dollars that we're seeing that people have accumulated today are primarily pre-tax money. So you see this big fat account, and you've got to wrap your head around, how do I take this big fat account? And part of that is my money. Part of it is the government's money. And how do I create that income flow? And that is even though it will grow, hopefully, it is a finite amount of money that you're creating that income, unlike the pension. I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for people to really create that retirement flow.
Is that what you think?
That I do.
Let me say one other thing.
Okay.
You can establish income from your investment portfolios. It doesn't all have to be capital gains. You can use things such as high-paying dividend stocks. You can have interest. Primarily, the interest you should be using is from bonds because it'll be higher. You can get annuities with a guaranteed income rider, real estate for income. We're looking for cash flow in retirement. Getting paid is very important in retirement. In our world, we would call that bucket number 2. So as you're looking at where money needs to be placed, how much do you have over here on the safe side? How much do you have over there on the growth side? But the middle bucket, number 2, that's what is sending out cash flow to you, things that you can actually spend so you can fund your retirement goals and still be able to have some left over.
So another thing that makes retirement a little bit more difficult or complicated is now versus previous generations is, now we're living longer. So before it was fairly shorter lifespan.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to really have their money spread out or last as long.
Right. We're watching Hell on Wheels, which is some series, and we're hooked on it. We can't get away from it. It must be about 10 years worth of episodes. But, the life expectancy for those boys is a lot lower.
Yeah.
Because they got shot all the time.
Yeah,
in the Old
especially if they
West.
got around the main character. But
Well,
anyway.
if you look from birth, the average life expectancy is about 79 or 80 years old, somewhere in that range. But if you've made 65, your life expectancy is a lot longer. How many people do you know that are in their late 80s, early 90s, or even further along? Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a father who's 96, I have an aunt who's 95, and I have an uncle who's 94, all, just my bloodline, and so we're looking at these people and they've lived a long time. How long are you going to live? A short life expectancy would mean you didn't put as much pressure on your money. Mm-hmm. Same thing for the pension from the company. If you lived until 67, 68, 69, 70, somewhere in that range, you didn't pull as much out of the pension pool. And so there was more money for the General Motors of the world or the Reynolds of the world to be able to pay those pensions out. Now it's very tough because people live a lot longer. So you've got to think about, maybe having a retirement that's 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, almost you're in retirement as long as you were at work, pretty close. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to make sure that you've set up cash flow that's reliable and you're not just pulling from CDs or you're not just trying to hit the home run with the money you've got to spend maybe next month. You've got to think about it differently and actually have a financial plan in place that helps you to understand how you meet your goals, what the parameters are on what you can and can't do. For example, we had a couple that came in last week, great couple. They had an income goal, not going to be able to do it. I mean, it was a very low probability of success. And I said, guys, I want you to go home. It was on a Friday. And I said, here's what we've got to think about. Either you're going to need to save more. They've got a little time. They're not getting ready to retire right now, but close. Or we need to maybe work a little longer to close the gap. Or maybe we change how much you want and sort of reduce the income goal a little bit. And so then Cameron, new advisor here in our office, calls them and they said, why don't we reduce the goal some? Because they didn't want to work longer. And they were saving pretty much at their cap. So what we did was we worked the plan and showed maybe about $10,000 a year less, but it worked wonderfully when we did that. So that's part of financial planning, is understanding where the line in the sand is.
So let's talk a little bit about lower healthcare costs. It certainly was a little bit more affordable back in the day, as people like to say. It outpaces regular inflation. And of course, we all know that healthcare costs has gotten crazy.
Right. And it kind of goes hand in hand with longer life expectancy.
Sure. Yeah.
So we got longer life expectancy, and that's because the medical profession has been so good about keeping us alive and fairly healthy, right? With drugs and operations, et cetera, et cetera.
So,
turn on any TV, and how many drug commercials are being displayed?
Oh, my gosh. If it wasn't for the pharmaceutical companies, the TV stations would go out of business. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
So, think about the things that they can do now. Now, I'm going to use a terrible example. I have 3 younger brothers and one that passed away. My mom had AB negative blood. He was born, and I don't remember exactly what happened because I was all of 1 year old, but he passed away. Why? Because he needed a transfusion. Today, it's like, give him a transfusion, a piece of cake. But back in 59 maybe, 58, somewhere in that range, guess what? They couldn't do it. So he did not survive. But now, so many things. We have a very good friend, came over last Sunday and had a long dinner, and we just blabbered for about 2 or 3 hours. But she's having cancer treatments. And I mean, she's been going a long time with something that probably 30, 40 years ago, that would not have happened.
Right.
I mean, you've got to think about the things that they do now and what they're going to do really makes a difference. And so, again, tying that back into life expectancy, not only may the cost for healthcare be something that you need to pay attention to, but the other side of it is how long you're going to live. I mean, you've got a finite amount of money. Probably. You've got at least one source of income, Social Security, maybe several, but at least one. And you've got to make sure that you've done the planning so that you don't spend that little puppy out and you're 80 years old, 82, 83, and all of a sudden you go, I cannot continue this lifestyle because I'm overspending. What I'm saying is you've got to look at it up front and make sure that you do it right.
And there are studies out there that say, the couple today that's 65 years old will spend $250. So there's some $250 to $350,000 in their retirement for their health care. And people think that when they go on Medicare,
No.
I'm not going to name names, Craig, but you thought that, man, once I get on Medicare, I'm going to flat wear it out. But no, it doesn't. It does not.
Negative Ghost Rider.
It does not cover all the things that you expect.
The wallet's not full.
That's right. And they do deny coverages. But anyway, you do need to build that into your plan. And that's one of the reasons why we do different scenarios. When you come in and talk with a financial advisor here, we're looking at several different scenarios for you that may derail your ideal plan. And one of those is higher healthcare costs. Does your plan support it? Typically, in a couple situation, the first couple who needs that health care, they're going to go ahead and spend that money on that spouse because they want that spouse to stay with them in their lifetime. But what does it do to their surviving spouse? That is the question. Is that going to deplete your assets? So when you do pass away, potentially for a health issue, does that surviving spouse have a decrease in lifestyle and...
Did you spend the nest egg?
Right, exactly. So, and that's one of the reasons we do that analysis, so we can show you, all right, is that something that you feel comfortable with? Is it going to be a problem? And if so, let's see if we can solve that today and put some measures in place to cover that higher health care. Because as you said, beginning, healthcare costs have outpaced inflation. And lately, inflation's been pretty darn high.
Let's go quickly because I want to do a couple of things here. So we live this. Again, we're living a lot of the things that we are discussing with you today.
Right.
Have you heard the term a sandwich society?
Sandwich generation,
Craig and Jennifer had mom live with us. That was great.
My mom.
And then we also had a son live with us at the same time. It's not a permanent thing, but he came back and he went and started a business and is building a house. And so we were like, we've enjoyed every minute of it, but we have two people living in our house that really, the younger generation and a parent at the same time. And so you have to look at that and say, what demands does that put on your budget? And if we had to pay, your mom was self-sufficient. She never cost us a dime, really.
No, she wanted to make sure she paid her own way. She gave us a check every month.
Every month. She was great. Such an independent soul.
She is the same woman that if when I was younger and I needed to borrow money, we had IOUs, buddy. You said, I owe you $10 and we better pay up,
Okay.
And then we would rip them up. So, yeah. Very much of the German influence.
Nice.
Anyhow, the sandwich generation is just that. If you have both sides of parents and children living at your home, you've got to make sure that you've dealt with that from a financial planning perspective.
And some of that is dealing not just with the monetary needs of having that extra mouth, that you're feeding or sheltering, but it's the time. So is your current occupation going to be impacted by having to divide your time between home and work? And sometimes that does, unfortunately, mean that maybe a spouse has to quit work or change hours, which means basically your income's not as much to generate that income and that savings for retirement. So you need to look at that and see how that impacts your particular plan and retirement situation. The other thing that we have run across with several clients, and unfortunately it has to do with the drugs and the fentanyl and all that's going on, is that some parents or grandparents are actually raising their grandkids as if they are their own child because for whatever reason their child has succumbed to drug addiction and potentially has passed. So that's another draw on your retirement lifestyle and potential savings in retirement.
Let's go quickly to Social Security before we burn through our time here. When you look at Social Security, a lot of people are worried about that. So let's look back in time, and there were roughly 5 workers back in 1960 for every one person drawing a Social Security check. So piece of cake, a lot of people paying in, one person using it. And today it's roughly 2 to 1. In other words, 2 people paying in, one person pulling money out. And a lot of people are worried about that. And somebody asked me the other day why, and I'm like, gosh, I don't know. So I did a little research, and some of it's just you women aren't having enough babies, Jennifer. It's fertility, and some of it's immigration. The younger crowd, is having babies, but we'll leave immigration alone. And the biggest part is aging population. Mm-hmm. So you look at us, we're not young anymore, but we're not super old. And we've got several children, and it's like, okay, you guys, start popping some kids out. Let's get going here. We have 3 grandkids, but we need 2 to start producing here and get this over with.
Well, one's married. The other one's not married yet, so we'll wait.
We'll wait on him. So what I'm leading up to is it's purely, some of it's a demographic thing. I've read all this stuff about them pillaging the Social Security Trust Fund, and I haven't seen that. Now, I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm saying that I haven't been able to find where the government took money out of the Social Security Trust Fund. But there's a lot of people paying into that. We're going to have to work on that because there's less people paying in. Mm-hmm. And as this baby boomer generation, a massive group of people, begins to retire as we are now, about 11,000 a day, we're going to want Social Security checks. We're going to want our Medicare benefits, and that's going to be difficult and rough on the system, and there are going to be changes. So we need to do the planning to make sure that we've looked at that. I also want to talk about interest rates, Jennifer. Yeah. So when I started, I remember this. I could get you a 12% tax-free bond. So think about this. If I had $500,000, I could kick out tax-free about $60,000 a year. That made it easy when we were doing the retirement plans back in the day. I mean, it was like, okay, very easy to hit our cash flow number and then invest the rest of the money for growth. I mean, think about it. If you had a 12% yield in your account, and even better if it was tax-free, my goodness, what could we do? It would be a lot easier to make things work. But now you look at interest rates, say back in 2020, back when COVID and all that, interest rates were 0.07 on the Fed funds rate. And right now we're at about 4.83. So let's just round up to 5%. That same $500,000 is going to generate, if you do it tax-free, about $22,000 a year. And if you use a corporate or a CD that would pay $5,000, if you can still get that, it's still only going to pay about $25,000. So think about it. We have less in cash flow because interest rates are lower. If you're a borrower, you're glad, but if you're an investor or a saver or a retiree, interest rates are pretty sweet, and they're probably going down, so be prepared for that.
And it's a little harder now because you don't have that kind of that floor, that fixed return, CDs, money market, that kind of thing. So now you've got to go to the market, and that kind of creates some angst with people. The money that you have accumulated will fuel your retirement and the lifestyle in retirement. Do you know how to turn that bucket of bolts that you've collected over the years into a steady income stream where you have income, you have growth, you can meet long-term care and healthcare costs, not deplete the funds for the spouse that survives? Do you know how to do that? And if you don't, you need to raise your hand and say, I need a little help, and I want to call a certified financial planner and Maestro Wealth to see if I can get going with my retirement plan. Where do I get started? I don't know where to start. We do this day in and day out.
Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. If you have any questions about what we've discussed, remember, you can get a complimentary financial review with the team at Maestro Wealth Advisors by calling 336-448-1086 or go online to howmoneyworksradio.com for other great resources and ways to reach the team. You can also check the show notes of today's episode for our contact information as well. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the most popular apps. For Craig and Jennifer Moser, I'm Mark Killian. We'll talk to you next time on the How Money Works podcast.
Craig Moser is a financial advisor and certified financial planner. Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through Avantax Affiliated Insurance Agency.